The phone rings at 6:41 on a Tuesday morning in March 2023. And Sandra Voss picks it up because that is what she has always done, answered every call before the second ring for 26 years. Because you never know, because it could be the one, because the day you stop answering quickly is the day something important slips past you. The line is quiet for a moment. Then a voice says her name. Not her full name. Not Sandra. The name only one person in the world has ever called her. A childhood nickname so specific and so private that Sandra has not heard it spoken aloud since 1997. She sits down on the kitchen floor. The voice on the other end of the line is coming from a payphone outside a gas station in Odessa, Texas. The woman holding the receiver has been standing at that payphone for 4 minutes, working up the nerve to dial. She memorized the number 26 years ago and has been keeping it the way you keep a flint in your pocket. Not because you plan to use it, but because you cannot bring yourself to let go of the last thing that might start a fire. Her name is Lynette Voss. She is 51 years old. She has been missing since April 3, 1997. She is not missing anymore. That call lasted 11 minutes. What happened in those 11 minutes, and in the 26 years that preceded them, and in the months of investigation that followed, is one of the most extraordinary cases the Texas Department of Public Safety's Cold Case Division has ever closed. But to understand what that phone call meant, and what it cost, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to go back to Mineral Wells, Texas. You have to go back to 1997. And you have to understand who Lynette Voss was before the world she knew disappeared around her. Mineral Wells sits in Palo Pinto County in north-central Texas, about 60 miles west of Fort Worth, in a stretch of rolling prairie and cedar breaks that feels like the edge of something larger. The beginning of West Texas, maybe, or the end of the populated part of the state, depending on which direction you're traveling. In 1997, the town had around 16,000 people, a history built around a famous mineral spring that had brought health seekers in the early part of the century, and a close-knit quality that came partly from its size and partly from its distance from anywhere else. People in Mineral Wells knew their neighbors. They knew their neighbors' business. They waved from their cars on streets they had driven their whole lives. Lynette Voss was 25 years old in the spring of 1997, the older of two sisters, a licensed cosmetologist who had worked at the same salon on Southeast Hubbard Street for 3 years. She was known among her clients for two things: an ability to listen without interrupting that made people tell her things they hadn't planned to say, and a laugh that her sister Sandra described as arriving without any warning, sudden and whole, like something she couldn't help. She drove a 1991 Chevy Cavalier in a shade of green that she called sage, and everyone else called the color of old peas. She did not care. She loved that car. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment on Northeast 3rd Street that she had decorated with plants she was systematically killing through overwatering, a project she refused to give up on despite considerable evidence that it was not going to end well. She called Sandra every Sunday evening. She was saving money, slowly, toward a cosmetology school instructor's certification. She had a plan. The plan was going to take 4 years, and she was fine with that. Sandra was 22 in 1997, 3 years younger, working at a grocery distribution center in Weatherford and living in an apartment 20 miles from Lynette's. They saw each other most weekends. They had the particular relationship of sisters who have been through difficult things together. Their mother had died when Sandra was 14 and Lynette was 17, and had come out the other side knowing that the other one was the fixed point in the world, the person you oriented toward when everything else shifted. Sandra wore a pager on her hip in 1997. Everyone did. If Lynette needed to reach her and couldn't get through by phone, she paged a code, 143. It meant "I love you," in the shorthand their mother had invented when pagers first appeared, and which the girls had carried forward after she was gone. In early 1997, Lynette had begun seeing a man named Curtis Breed. He was 34 years older, a long-haul trucker who came through mineral wells on a regular route. He was charming in the way that some men are charming before you understand what the charm is covering. Sandra met him once, in February, and drove home afterward with a feeling she could not name precisely, but that she took seriously enough to call Lynette the next morning and ask, carefully, how things were going. Lynette said things were fine. Sandra asked if she was sure. There was a pause. Then, Lynette said yes, she was sure. And then she changed the subject. That was the last conversation Sandra remembered having with her sister that felt normal. 4 weeks later, Lynette was gone. On the morning of Friday, April 4th, 1997, Lynette did not show up for her 8 o'clock appointment at the salon. This was not like her. Her client waited 20 minutes and then called the salon desk, and the desk called Lynette's apartment. No answer. A coworker drove by on her lunch break. The Cavalier was gone. The apartment appeared undisturbed through the window. The mail from the day before was in the box. Sandra paged 143 at noon. No response. She paged again at 2. Nothing. She called Lynette's apartment 17 times between noon and 6 in the evening. She drove to Mineral Wells after work. She used her spare key to let herself in. The apartment was in order. The plants were on the sill, the overwatered ones, still inexplicably alive. The cosmetology manuals were stacked on the coffee table. On the kitchen counter, beside the phone, was a notepad with Curtis Breed's name written on it, and below it a number Sandra did not recognize, and below that a single word that Lynette had underlined twice. The word was careful. Sandra called the Mineral Wells Police Department at 7:15 p.m. She told them her sister was missing. She told them about Curtis Breed. She told them about the notepad. The officer who took her report was respectful and thorough. He noted everything. He told Sandra that 24 hours had not yet passed, and that in most cases adults who appeared to have left voluntarily were located within a few days. Sandra told him that Lynette had not left voluntarily. The officer said he understood her concern and that they would follow up. He did follow up. So did the detective assigned to the case 3 days later, when Lynette's Cavalier was found abandoned at a rest stop on Highway 180, 18 miles east of Mineral Wells, doors unlocked, keys on the seat. The tank was a quarter full. The radio was off. On the passenger side floor was Lynette's purse, containing her wallet, her driver's license, $38 in cash, and her pager. She had not paged Sandra back because she no longer had her pager. The detective assigned was a Palo Pinto County investigator named Sergeant Roy Hutchins, a 15-year veteran who had worked 4 prior missing persons cases. He drove to the rest stop the morning after the car was found and walked the area himself in the early April light. He stood beside the Cavalier for a while and thought about what it meant that Lynette had left her purse and her wallet and her pager. He concluded what Sandra had already concluded. She had not left on her own terms. Curtis Breed was located within 48 hours. He was in El Paso, at the end of a run. He was interviewed by phone and then in person when he returned to the Mineral Wells area the following week. He denied knowing anything about Lynette's disappearance. He said they had ended their relationship 2 weeks earlier, that it had been mutual, that he had not seen her since. His logbooks showed him in New Mexico on April 3rd, the day before the car was found. The logbooks were reviewed by investigators. A fuel receipt from a station in Tucumcari, New Mexico, time-stamped April 3rd at 2:17 in the afternoon, appeared to support his account. Hutchins noted that El Paso to Tucumcari was a plausible route. He noted that Mineral Wells was not on that route. He noted the logbooks carefully, and then he noted something else. The receipt was from a truck stop that had self-service pumps that required no interaction with the cashier. The timestamp was recorded automatically. It proved the truck had been there. It did not prove Breed had been in it. He flagged it. He could not disprove the alibi with what he had. He kept going. The investigation over the following months produced no witnesses who had seen Lynette after the evening of April 3rd, no physical evidence in Breed's truck despite a consented search, and no confirmed sightings of Lynette anywhere. Her bank account went untouched. She had no known reason to run. She had not contacted any friends or family. She had simply stopped, as completely as a person can stop, somewhere between her apartment on Northeast 3rd Street and the rest stop on Highway 180. By the fall of 1997, the case had no new leads. Hutchins kept the file on his desk for 2 years. He requested a review from the Texas Department of Public Safety in 1999. The review confirmed there was insufficient evidence to charge anyone. The case was classified cold. Sandra Voss answered every phone call before the second ring. By 2002, 5 years had passed. Sandra had moved back to Mineral Wells to be closer to the people who had known Lynette, as though proximity to that community could substitute for something she could no longer have. She had contacted the Palo Pinto County Sheriff's Office and the DPs every year on April 3rd. She had printed flyers, updated them, distributed them. She had created a page on a missing persons website that she updated whenever she thought of something new to add, which grew less frequent as the years moved forward, and the details of 1997 became something she had to actively reconstruct rather than simply remember. She kept Lynette's pager number in her own contact list under Lynette's name. The service had been disconnected years ago. It did not matter. She was not going to delete it. By 2010, 13 years had passed. Curtis Breed had left long-haul trucking in the early 2000s and was working a local delivery route out of Abilene. He had married. He had 2 children. He appeared, to all external observation, to have moved through his life without incident since 1997. Roy Hutchins had retired from the county in 2008. He mentioned the Voss case to his replacement. He mentioned it twice. By 2018, 21 years had passed. The salon on Southeast Hubbard Street had closed and become a tax preparation office. The apartment on Northeast 3rd Street had been rented by 4 different tenants since Lynette. The rest stop on Highway 180 had been renovated and the lot expanded. None of those places held anything anymore. They had just become the places where something had happened once. Sandra was 43. She had not stopped. She had learned to carry it differently, lower, closer to the center, the way you learn to carry weight you cannot put down. She still answered every call before the second ring. What she did not know, in 2018, was that Lynette was alive. What she did not know was that Lynette had been alive the entire time. Before we get to that phone call and everything it opened, we want to take a moment. Cases like Lynette's take weeks to research, verify, and write, and we do that work because of you. If this story matters to you, please like the video and subscribe, and drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. It genuinely makes this possible. Now, back to Texas. Back to Lynette. The Texas Department of Public Safety's Cold Case Unit received a new case supervisor in January 2021, a woman named investigator Therese Campos, who had spent 12 years working human trafficking cases before transferring to cold case review. She had a specific lens from that work, a way of reading disappearance cases that looked not just for evidence of harm, but for patterns consistent with coercive control, isolation, and forced relocation. She pulled the Voss case file in March 2021 as part of a systematic review of female missing persons cases from the 1990s that had never been resolved. She read it in a single afternoon. Then she read it again with a different question in her mind, one she had learned to ask from her trafficking work. Not where did this woman go, but where would someone take her if they needed her to disappear completely and stay that way? She pulled everything on Curtis Breed. His trucking routes in 1997, his connections across state lines, his life after Mineral Wells, his current location in Abilene. She also ran Lynette's name, photograph, and physical description through the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, cross-referencing against records of women who had come to the attention of social services, law enforcement, or domestic violence organizations under different names in the years following 1997. In August 2021, a partial match surfaced from a domestic violence shelter intake record in Odessa, Texas, dated 2019. A woman who had given a different name had listed, under emergency contacts, a phone number in the Weatherford area code. The number was no longer active, but the area code was Sandra's. Campos drove to Odessa. The shelter's records, accessed with the woman's eventual consent after Campos made contact through the shelter's current staff, contained a photograph from the 2019 intake. Campos looked at the photograph. She looked at the 1997 missing persons photo of Lynette Voss. She set them side by side on the table in the shelter director's office and looked at them for a long time. She picked up her phone and called her supervisor. "I need someone to run a DNA comparison," she said. "And I need it quietly." The DNA comparison, conducted with a voluntary sample obtained through a process that took 4 months of careful, consent-based contact through the shelter's advocacy staff, confirmed the match in December 2022. The woman living in Odessa under a different name was Lynette Voss. Campos called Sandra on a Wednesday evening. "I need you to understand," Campos said carefully, "that what I'm about to tell you is confirmed, and that she is safe, and that she is alive." Sandra did not speak for a long time. "Where is she?" she finally said. "Odessa," Campos said. "She's in Odessa, and she knows we've found her. She's been told that you've been looking for her for 26 years. And she wants to call you. But she wants to do it herself, in her own time, in her own way." Sandra said, "Tell her I'll answer." On Tuesday, March 7, 2023, at 6:41 in the morning, Lynette Voss stood at a payphone outside a gas station in Odessa and dialed a number she had kept in her memory for 26 years, like a coal held in a closed fist, present, warm, something she would not let go of even when she thought she might have to. Sandra answered before the second ring. The investigation that followed Lynette's identification and her decision to cooperate with law enforcement produced a picture of what had happened in the 26 years since April 1997. Court documents filed in the Ector County District Court in the summer of 2023 detail a case built on Lynette's testimony, corroborating records, and digital evidence recovered from multiple sources. What those documents describe, in the careful language of legal proceedings, is a sustained pattern of coercive control that had begun before Lynette disappeared and had kept her isolated, relocated, and living under a name that was not hers for more than 2 decades. The documents do not use the word kidnapping in every instance. The law has precise language for what happened, and it was applied precisely. What the documents describe, in plain terms, is a man who had decided that a woman was his to keep, and had spent 26 years enforcing that decision. Curtis Breed was arrested at his home in Abilene on June 14, 2023. He was 60 years old. He opened the door and looked at the investigators, and then looked past them, as though searching for something behind them, and then looked back at them. He said nothing. He was charged with aggravated kidnapping, unlawful restraint, and related offenses under Texas law. He entered a not guilty plea. The trial was scheduled for the spring of 2024. In February of that year, facing the full weight of Lynette's testimony and the corroborating evidence Campos's investigation had assembled over 2 years, Breed changed his plea to guilty. He was sentenced to 40 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. He was taken into custody immediately. He will not be released. In Abilene, where Breed had lived and worked for over a decade, the response to his arrest was the particular kind of shock that arrives when someone appears normal for long enough that the community has stopped asking whether they are. Co-workers said they had never seen anything. Neighbors said the same. His wife, from whom he had been separated at the time of his arrest, issued no public statement. In Mineral Wells, the response was different. The salon was gone. Many of the people who had known Lynette in 1997 had moved on or passed on. But Sandra had stayed, and the people who had stayed with her, the ones who had watched her answer every call before the second ring for 26 years, came to her house the evening the arrest was announced and stood on her porch, and did not need to say very much because they had already been saying it, in the way that communities say things without speaking, for a very long time. Lynette Voss is 51 years old. She is living in Texas, in a location she has chosen to keep private, rebuilding a life that was taken from her when she was 25. She has spoken publicly only once, in a brief statement released through investigator Campos's office in the fall of 2023, in which she thanked the cold case unit and thanked her sister, and said that she was not yet ready to say much more than that, and that she hoped people would understand. People understood. Sandra Voss still lives in Mineral Wells. She has said in one interview that the 26 years of not knowing were the hardest thing she has ever survived, and that the knowing, even the complicated, layered, difficult knowing of how Lynette was found and what she had been through, was easier than the not knowing. She said that she did not care what Lynette needed. She said she would wait as long as it took. She deleted the pager number from her contact list the morning after the phone call. Not because she was letting go of Lynette. Because she no longer needed it to hold on. There is something this case illuminates that is worth sitting with carefully, because it is not simple. For 26 years, Lynette Voss was classified as a missing person, an adult who had disappeared under circumstances suggesting possible voluntary departure. The fuel receipt in New Mexico, the absence of confirmed physical evidence, the difficulty of proving what a person cannot disprove, these are the mechanisms by which cases like hers drift toward cold. But what investigator Campos brought to the file in 2021 was a different question, one that the original investigation could not have asked in quite the same way in 1997. Not did she leave, but was she the kind of person who could have been made to disappear by someone with a long-haul route and a willingness to wait? That question, asked with the right experience behind it, is what found Lynette. The payphone she called from in Odessa that March morning has since been removed. Most payphones have been, across Texas and everywhere else. They are nearly gone now, those glass and steel booths that used to stand at the edges of gas stations and diners, waiting for someone to have a dime and a reason to use them. Lynette had kept a reason for 26 years. She found one of the last ones left, and she used it. She called her sister's name, the name only one person in the world had ever called her. Sandra sat down on the kitchen floor and answered. "We'd like to know your thoughts on what this case raises. Do you think the original 1997 investigation could have done more with what it had? Or was the evidence genuinely too thin at the time for a different outcome? What does it tell us that it took an investigator with a trafficking background to ask the question that cracked this case open? And how many other missing persons files might look different through that same lens? And what do you make of Lynette's choice to call Sandra herself, from a payphone, in her own time? What does that tell you about what she needed after 26 years? Leave your answer in the comments. Justice found Lynette Voss 26 years after a Tuesday morning in Mineral Wells. It came because a sister answered every call before the second ring, and because an investigator asked a question nobody had thought to ask. Those two things, stubborn love and a different lens, are sometimes all it takes. If you believe stories like this one deserve to be told, subscribe so you're here for the next case. More are in the description below. Thank you for being here.